Welcome back. Today we have a 2003 Chevy Impala. Needs front brakes and rotors, so we're going to go through doing that. Should be a pretty simple job, but it's a common maintenance item. That's just a wear item on your car, and if you're just starting out or haven't done a lot, this is probably one of the good places to start. So I've got this car up on jack stands. Don't get under a car, work on cars if you're just on a floor jack. You don't trust the floor jack, just be safe. So I had jack stands on both sides of this car, the front end lifted up so I could work on it. I want to go through what you'll need tool-wise for this job. It's not a lot. You'll need a 19mm socket for lug nuts to get the wheels off. You need a 15mm socket or wrench to undo the slide bolts for the caliper and the caliper mounting bolts. You'll need something to push the brake piston in with. I have a tool, but you can use a C-clamp, large C-clamp, or a large pair of channel lock pliers. Of course, chemical 1001 uses, brake clean. Screwdriver to help you get the caliper off the rotor when you're taking it off. And some kind of sandpaper to sand the hub. Scotch-Brite sandpaper. I have a little air 90-degree die. Something to sand with, and brake grease. You need brake grease for this. I use Permatex. The pads come with a little bit, but high temperature grease, you'll need that. We're just going to take this wheel off. If you don't have air tools, then you want to make sure you break these lug nuts loose when the wheel's on the ground, then pick it up and finish taking them off. Next, we're going to take this caliper off of here. So next, we're going to actually undo the slide bolts here, break them loose. These are 13 or 14mm. I'll let you know in a minute. We're going to loosen them first, and then we're going to take this whole bracket off, this whole caliper bracket. All right, these are actually 15mm. The slide bolts. Let's see if I can get this in here to get this off. If not, I'll do it by hand. I don't think I'm going to get the top one. Give you a better shot at that. Let's see it better. Come on. I don't know if I can get this. Well, there's my answer. I can't get it. So these just slide out. Check them when you pull them out. Sometimes cars have different, like this one. You see these has a little collar on it, and this one doesn't. So the collar goes on the top, so you want to make sure you put it back there. I'm actually going to stick them back in temporarily. I just wanted them loose. I don't want it to really come apart right now. So now we're going to reach in behind the caliper bracket. It looks like maybe they're 15mm too. What do you think? They're, let me see if I can show you this. So, it's hard to see, but right there, that's the bolt that holds the caliper bracket onto the steering knuckle. There's one up top, and there's one down the bottom. We're going to take them off next. Well, I ain't cutting it, so we'll switch to a different gun. Probably going to have to get a 15mm wrench for this top one to break it loose. Then I'll be able to take it out of there. No, maybe not. We'll see. And the big gun out for that one. Same thing for the top. Okay, I'm going to get a hanger and hang this caliper so it doesn't hang on that brake line. I've got this hook that I made. You can buy these as well. Or you can just use a bungee cord and you just want to hang this caliper up so it doesn't hang on this flexible brake line. So you can do this two ways. Sometimes you can get in here with a screwdriver, get in between the pad and the rotor, push the piston back in a little bit if I can. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it on this one. I don't think so. Otherwise, just pry it like that, get it started. They get stuck on the outer ridge of the rotor a lot of times and just wiggle it off. Hang it up here. Just hang that right there like that. There go the pads, you can see. these pads, they're about done. There's probably a millimeter left on that one, and not much more on this one. So time to change them. So wiggle the rotor off. This rotor's getting replaced. The new one's already been cut once. See if we can turn this a little bit better angle of it. Now that I took the rotor off, I took all my leverage that I had off. Okay, here we go. So we're going to clean this hub up. We're going to get all the corrosion off of here. There's not a lot, so I've done these before. And then we're going to grease the face of this with high temperature grease to keep the corrosion from getting back in there. So what generally happens with these, if you don't do that, is they'll corrode around the hub, particularly. Sometimes they corrode right to the face of the hub, but they'll corrode around this hole in the rotor, and then they're really hard to get off sometimes. So to avoid that, we're just going to clean this hub off. It's not real dirty, and grease it before we put the new rotor on. So of course, if you don't have the air tools for this, you could just use a piece of sandpaper or emery cloth. Scotch Brite clean this up good. Of course, Brite Clean, chemical of 1001 uses. Spray it down, let it dry. We're going to go and get the rotors. Actually, before we do that, we're going to actually take this caliper and we're going to clean it up, get ready to put the new hardware on it. So now I'll take my slide pins out, set them aside. Hang my caliper back up for a time being. So what we're going to do with this, and I said this in my other videos, and I'll say it again, check your boots. Make sure your boots are not cracked or dried out. These actually look good, so we'll leave them alone. Always replace this hardware. This hardware that's on these clips are stainless steel, but you want to replace them, and what you want to do before you do that is clean up behind where the hardware goes. There's no corrosion in these because they've been greased before. Well, I did these a few years ago. There's a little bit right here, but not much. You want to get all that corrosion out of there because we're going to re-grease these and then put new hardware on there. So I'm going to take these over to the wire wheel and I'm going to clean this up. Okay, so I have the caliper bracket cleaned up, and I have this Permatex Ceramic Extreme brake grease. You can use any brake grease. It just has to be brake grease. It has to be high temp grease. Regular grease will just melt out. Won't do any good. So we're just going to cover underneath. Hopefully you can see this. Cover underneath where the hardware is going to go. Get a thin coating on there. All that does is help to keep the corrosion out of there. Corrosion gets behind behind this hardware. What it has a tendency to do is push the hardware up into the end of the pad, the metal tab on the pad, and it has a tendency to bind it up a little bit, and they won't work as well as they should. So we just make sure we put a coating of grease behind the hardware before we put it together. Keep that from happening. I just got to figure out which way I want to do this. No. We'll clip the hardware in there like that. That's it. We're going to do the same thing on this end. The other one on there now. Clip it in place. Good. So it's ready to go. We checked the boots, as I said earlier. We're going to re-grease the slide pins. These slide pins. We're going to clean them and re-grease them. You don't want to put a lot on here. You want to get a coating on here. If you put too much and you've really loaded up with the grease, it kind of creates a hydraulic action and it can lock them up. So you just want a thin coating on here. Clean them off. Re-grease them. Same grease, brake grease. Make sure you use synthetic brake grease on them, or Sil Glide, and it's ready to go. We've got the caliper here. And we have to do the same thing. We cleaned off the mounting bracket. We're going to take a piece of Scotch Brite in this case, or sandpaper, whatever you have, and we're going to clean the tabs that ride on the back of the pad, and we're going to clean the face of this piston. We're going to clean and get any corrosion off of there, and then we're going to grease them as well. So we've got to push this piston back in. So you can do this with a big C-clamp and a pad, or a big pair of channel locks. I have a tool. We'll just stick an old pad in there, put the tool in there, and we'll push that piston. The piston should go back in pretty easily. It shouldn't really fight you that much. If it does, you may have to check your caliper. If your caliper's bad, or you may check this line. Sometimes these lines get clogged from corrosion, so this should go back in pretty easy. So we'll just turn it back in, and it is. It's going in pretty easy. Hopefully you can see that. I'm just trying to get it where you can see it. Kind of push it back in. Tilt that up a little bit for you, maybe. Yeah, push that piston right back in, and you can see it's going right back in there pretty easily. I want to push that all the way in, so when we go put the new pads and rotor on there, we can get it back on the rotor. You'll feel it bottom out when it gets in there. That's about it. That's all the way in. That's about as much as my tool could reach too. Should be plenty. Alright. Now, as I said before, we clean it. Now we need to grease it. Same thing, grease them. Here's the back of them. So, the reason we grease these is because this is where the back of the pad sits. It'll sit against these tabs, keeps the corrosion out of there, and keeps them from vibrating and making noise as well. Same thing with the face of this piston. All the way around, we want to get a nice coat of grease on it. These little things, doing these little things makes a world of difference when you do this. Take a couple extra minutes and do this. Alright. So I went down to Pep Boys and got some Wagner QS pads. There's the part number ZX818 for this particular car. Okay, I've got the rotor here, which I'm going to have to clean. These come with a coating when they're new, and you have to spray these down, either wash them with soap and water, or just use brake clean and spray them down. So I'll spray these down and clean them really good before we put them on. These are Pro Stop high carbon rotors. Go down to Pep Boys and get these. Part number for this car is right here. Hopefully you can see that. 55034HC, high carbon. I'm pretty particular about my rotors. And I found these rotors, these high carbon rotors, are really good. I've had zero problems with these on multiple cars, many cars. They just don't warp like a regular rotor. Buy cheap rotors, I won't use them. I try to use OEM, but a lot of times OEM is just too ridiculously expensive. I can't justify paying 3 or 4 times the amount for a rotor or a part. If it's, most of the time, unfortunately, OEM is really expensive. I'll go to these and use these, and I've had zero issues with these. They don't warp. They are definitely harder. I mentioned this in one of my other videos. I had a set of these on this car, and it got hit. In fact, it's his front set, and I had to get them cut because the car sat for a couple months and the pad rusted on the rotor, and I couldn't get it to smooth out. And when they went to cut them, they had to change and put a brand new bit in the brake lathe, because the bit that they were using for the other rotors wouldn't cut these. They were so much harder. Spend a little money. These are not that expensive. I think there's something on sale. They were something like $30 a piece, something like that. Not very expensive at all, but these high carbon rotors work really well. Really like them. As I mentioned before we put this rotor on here, these rotors have a coating on them, paint, electrostatic. I don't know exactly what it is, but it doesn't come off. So I'm not worried about these corroding so much, but I'm going to put a thin coat of grease, high temperature grease on that face of that hub to help keep it from corroding. Don't need a lot, but I just want to cover it so it doesn't corrode, rust doesn't get in there. Northeast where I'm from, it's winter time. It's not winter now, but in the winter, you get a lot of salt on the roads and tears them up if you don't protect them. Now we're ready to put the rotor back on. I think that That was the hardest part for me right there. Couldn't get it squared away. Rotors on there. We're going to hang this caliper back on there. Caliper bracket, I should say. I just dropped the pad out of it, which I'll have to put back on, but we'll do that after we get it on there. Just going to start them by hand. Always start them by hand. Okay, get that bolt started so it holds it. You could put a nut on here if I wanted to. I just don't feel like doing it right now. Hold that rotor in place. Need to. Got the top one started. Make sure the bottom one's started right. Got them both started. We'll run them in their 15mm. Turn this maybe so you can see a little better. Maybe if I can. Might be able to. I don't know if that's going to help you to see anything, but it makes me feel a little better. I did something. Alright, just run them in. Got both of my pads out of it. Knocked both of my pads out of the bracket. No big deal. Make sure they're clean, you're good. Put them back in. One, the inside one, everything looks good on it. Set them in place, just squeeze them against the rotor. Make sure the rotor, push the rotor in. Squeeze them against the rotor, and that's it. So now we can take our caliper, put our caliper back on. Make sure you don't twist that flexible brake line. Slide this right down into place, and watch your boots. So your rubber boots, I'll show you this top one. Want to push them in, make sure they don't get pinched, and then we'll put our slide bolts back in. I've cleaned and greased these slide bolts. We're just going to slide them back in. Remember that little collar on the end of this one that goes in the top. That's where it came from. So I just start it. Make sure it gets started correctly. Get them both in there and started. Torque them to spec. I don't tell you torque specs because it can vary car to car. You can find it online. It's pretty easy to find. Just go look it up and torque it to whatever it needs to be torqued to. Put this on too, I think. Right in the way. We'll finish them up with a wrench, both of them, and then make sure they're tight. I'm just going to tighten these up real quick, snug them up. These don't need to kill them, but you do need to tighten them up. That's tight. Same thing with the bracket mounting bolts. That's tight. Okay. Alright, that's pretty much it. Not a very difficult job at all. Before you drive the car, get in, pump the brakes up till the brake pedal gets hard, and seat those pads against that rotor. You know, it's loose right now. You see it's moving around. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit of a scary moment when you first step on the brakes because you won't have any. So make sure you do that. Obviously, I'm going to put this wheel back on here. One thing additional I always do is I take a little anti-seize and I put it on the lug nuts before I put the wheel back on. Keeps them from corroding and locking up a wheel lug, breaking a stud off. So that's about it. It's an easy job, just regular maintenance on a car, front brakes, not very difficult at all. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the video, subscribe below. Thanks for watching.